Do you ever feel like some of the things that Jesus says are really confusing? Like when he says that we have to hate our parents and our family in order to follow him. Or when he refers to a woman as a dog. Or how about when Jesus says this? Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. I mean, does he really mean that? That we are blessed when people hate us and reject us? That can't be what he means. Or can it? Well, today I'm going to show you some words in that statement that will totally open your eyes to what Jesus is really saying here. So if you want to find out what they are, then join me for this episode of Misreading Scripture. Now, before we start, if you're interested in learning more about these insights that will help you to understand the Bible more clearly and see it with an entirely new set of eyes, then make sure to click the link above and in the description below, where you can download a free book that I wrote called 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. It's a quick but powerful read that will teach you a whole lot in just a short period of time, just like this video. So let's dive in. Now, when Jesus makes this bold statement that we are blessed when people hate us, he's doing so just as he's beginning what many people call his Sermon on the Plain. Perhaps you've heard of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This is the famous sermon that Jesus preaches beginning in Matthew chapter 5. It's where he delivers the Beatitudes, teaches about salt and light, and makes many other essential statements about who he is and what it means to follow him. Well, in Luke's gospel, Jesus does something similar, but in a different setting. He's standing on a level place, and people have gathered from many miles away to hear him preach. Now, just before this, Luke told us that Jesus selected his 12 disciples from among a larger group of followers. And just before that, Luke told us about a conflict Jesus had with some religious leaders over healing on the Sabbath. All of these things are going to matter in order to understand this passage. And so with all of that in mind, let's look again at what Jesus says in these Sermon on the Plain Beatitudes. He says this, he says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man." Now let's look a bit closer at what Jesus is actually saying here. The very first thing we see Jesus say is the word blessed. And we're going to want to pay close attention to this word because it doesn't mean what we think it does. You see, when we see the word blessed in English, our first instinct is to assume that it means that good fortune will fall upon someone, right? That whoever is facing these circumstances will be rewarded or experience some sort of tangible blessing. But that's not what Jesus means, right? The word that's translated blessed is actually the Greek word makarios. Now, there's no good translation for makarios in English, and in many ways, this is because of how we put our English sentences together. You see, in English, every sentence needs a subject, right? Even sentences that don't explicitly include a subject still imply a subject. So when Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor," our immediate question, whether we realize it or not, is who is doing the blessing? And our natural assumption, of course, is God, right? Blessed are the poor because God blesses them. But when we do that, we turn makarios into a transactional sort of word. God is blessing us because of what we do or the situation that we're in. God is the blesser and we are the blessed. But that's not what makarios is suggesting. Right? A better translation for makarios is you will feel truly content when. So if we were to retranslate this part of Luke 6, we might say, you can be truly content when people hate you, exclude you, insult you, and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. But of course, makarios is only part of the puzzle. Before we can understand why it's possible to be content in these circumstances, we have to look at a few other words. You see, the next word that Jesus says that catches our attention, the next word that really gives us pause, is when Jesus says that we can be truly content when people hate us. And the reason that this is so troubling to us is because in English, words like love and hate are words of emotion, right? They describe how we feel toward someone. So we interpret this statement to mean that we can be feeling content when we receive people's feelings of hate. But that's not how words like love and hate were understood by Jesus and his culture. The word for hate that we see used in this passage is the Greek word miseo, and the Hebrew equivalent would be the word sane. But sane doesn't mean hate as in an emotional feeling of hatred. And that's because in Hebrew, words like love and hate aren't words of emotion, they're words of action, right? They describe what you do. So to love something is to choose that thing, and to hate it is to not choose it. Now, this also helps us to explain another confusing statement by Jesus. You see, just a few chapters later in Luke, Jesus says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." This is one of those statements by Jesus that is so confusing that most people ignore it. But when we understand what words like love and hate mean, what they meant to Jesus, then all of a sudden it makes complete sense. Right? In this verse, Jesus isn't telling us that we need to feel an emotion of hate for our family members. He's saying that we have to choose him. Right? If we want to be his disciples, we have to choose him over everything else in our lives, even our family. We have to surrender ourselves to him completely, follow him where he leads us, do whatever he calls us to do, even if that means choosing him over those that we love most. So when we apply this to Jesus' statement in Luke 6, things again begin to become clear. Right? Jesus is saying you can be truly content when people don't choose you, when they don't want you. But Jesus doesn't end here, does he? Right? He doesn't just say when they hate you, he also says when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil. And it's that last phrase that stands out. Right? If for no other reason than because that sounds really strange in English, right? What does it mean to reject someone's name as evil? We would never say anything like that in English, but we definitely would if we spoke Hebrew. And let me explain. You see, when we step away from the English and look at the Greek words that are being translated in this verse, we see that the phrase reject your name as evil is made up of three Greek words: ekbalo, anoma, and paneros, which translate sends out, name, and evil. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem very different, but it does when you look at this phrase in Hebrew. Because you see, there was a Hebrew idiom that was very common at the time of Jesus, motzeh shemra, which literally translates to put out a bad name. And so what we're seeing is this Hebrew idiom transliterated into Greek, right? Motzeh is related to the Hebrew word yatzah, which means to bring out or to cause to go out. Shem is the word for name, and Ra is the word for bad. So motzeh shem Ra means to cause a bad name to go out, to put out a bad name. But like I said, motzeh shem Ra was an idiom. It was a phrase used to refer to slander. It described the act of spreading lies about someone. In fact, this was something that was so bad, rabbis began to teach of the connection between motzeh shem Ra and the Hebrew word metzora. You see, metzora is the Hebrew word for leprosy. That's how awful motzeh shem Ra was. It destroyed things. It made both the person speaking and the person being spoken of unclean. And so what Jesus is saying here is that you can be truly content even when people do that to you, even when they slander you, even when they do something as awful as motzeh shem Ra. But then there's one more phrase that we can't miss here. Because Jesus gives a reason why this rejection's happening, a reason why they will endure these things, which also happens to be the reason that they can be makarios, the reason that they can be truly content. He says that you are makarios. You can be makarios when people do all these things to you on account of the Son of Man. Now, at that time, the phrase Son of Man was commonly understood to be a reference to the Messiah. It was based on a passage from Daniel 7 when Daniel says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." And now, with this final piece of the puzzle, everything begins to connect. Because when we look at this verse again, and when we look at it in light of everything that's been going on in Luke's gospel leading up to this moment, when we remember how Jesus has just picked these 12 men to be his disciples from among a larger group of followers, and how these men have recently witnessed Jesus come up against religious leaders, the people who hold incredible power and sway within the Jewish community. When we consider that as Jesus says these words, they're still taking all this in, right? The excitement and the cost of being selected to have this role in Jesus' ministry that they're wrestling with and trying to figure all of this out, right? Well, then all of a sudden, Jesus' words look a lot different here. Right? Jesus is saying to his disciples and to us, you can be truly content when people don't want you because of me. When they exclude you and insult you and slander you because of me, you can do all of this because I am the Son of Man. I am the promised Messiah. I've chosen you to be my disciples. And let me tell you, it will be hard. You will suffer, but you can find contentment in the midst of this. Even though people might slander your names, you can do this because you now bear my name. You are now part of something so great. You now have a hope that is so strong that you can be content even in the midst of whatever they might try to do to you. Let me ask you, where do these words resonate in your life? Where are you suffering for Jesus, but also finding your contentment in him? Where can this verse be good news for you? Because this is what can happen when we truly dive into Scripture and see it with a new set of eyes. Scriptures that once made little to no sense now come alive. And so, if you haven't done it already, take a moment and download my free book, 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. Right? You'll find a link up here and down in the description. And if you'd like to see another video that will help you to see a familiar passage in an entirely new way, well then check out this link right over here. Thank you so much for watching today. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.